Hi, everybody. It's Mary Rowe from City Talk. Glad to have you joining us here. We're coming in from all parts of the country. Welcome to City Talk. Pleased to be able to do this one in June. What an interesting time we are living in. I always feel like I could start that and say that every broadcast we do. But, we used to have this joke, pictures at 11, but when things were happening so quickly. Um, and so many interesting events and different kinds of circumstances that are affecting us. We appreciate people checking in on the chat, telling us where you're coming in from. Several hundred people will watch this live with us, and then lots of others will download it subsequently. I happen to be in Toronto today, but I've just come from Calgary and Edmonton. So, hi, for those of you that I was just with in the middle of the country. Here we are back in Ontario, where it was hot, not so hot, but it's still pretty humid here. CUI is head office happens to be in Toronto, but we have staff working across the country, as all of you know. As Toronto happens to be where I am today, and that is home to many First Nations and Inuit and Métis peoples, and as many of you know, covered under the Williams Treaty and Treaty 13. Also with the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee. And we continue to live with the legacy of colonization. Earlier this week, CUI released a report called Sacred Places, Civic Assets, talking about what's happening with institutions, buildings that were built by faith communities over, in some cases, centuries, and what their future needs to look like, because they are facing all sorts of economic challenges, and they just don't have the volunteer capacity that they once had, because people aren't going to church the way they once did. And we're saying these are civic assets. So I'm going to ask the team to put that into the chat so you can download that report, because it's all part of this evolving conversation about how the built environment evolves and how it changes, and how it changes to reflect and respond to the needs of the people that live and depend on different aspects of it. And this session today on the circular economy and on circularity, particularly in the built environment, is so crucial for us to understand. It teaches us lots about how we actually tighten those feedback loops, create more reciprocal activity, which is what economies are. The way that energy, and in this case, materials, but in money, all the different forms, circulates and circulates and circulates, if it's enabled to do so, versus leaking out, versus being lost into other more less productive use. And so I really appreciate the folks that are coming on this call today to just take us down a bit of a path. There'll be many people in the chat that have experience in this, and some of you this may be your first exposure to this notion of circularity and how it works in the built environment. But by all means, use the chat, put some questions in there, put some comments in there. We publish the chat, as you all know, so it's a really valuable resource. We've done over 250 of these City Talks since April of 2020, and they continue to be downloaded and referred to. We're creating a kind of archive of what innovation and local problem solving looks like on the ground. So I'm really appreciative to have all of you with us. I'm going to ask Carly, actually, I'm going to if I could ask all our guests to put their cameras on for a minute so that everybody can see who's here. Let's put you all on. And I'll thank in advance our producers. This is our last City Talk of the year, and of the count. Well, I live with this, that this is kind of the end of the year, but it's not. And I don't even have kids. But that thing where you kind of orient yourself that we're just getting to the summer holiday. Well, we're a little bit like that. We're taking a break over the summer, but we have many, many folks that are involved with this. So thank you for. I'll thank the producers at the end of the show, but also just thanks, gang, for joining us on a June when you probably are ready to planning to go to the camp or the cottage or your backyard, or the park. Thanks for taking the time. So this is our gang, the assembled experts from coast to coast, bringing different perspectives on this. And I'm going to start with Carly. The rest of you can flip your cameras off. You're going to come back, but I'll call you back. But let's just start with Carly. We'll put into the bio, into the chat, who Carly is. But I just want to say how I got to Carly was through Lloyd Alter, who probably is on the chat. He's probably in the audience. Who writes a fabulous blog that I read regularly. And he's, of course, the founder of Tree Hugger. He's an architect and a city builder. And he is one of the early advocates for how we need to look at this material flow much differently. And so I then read about Carly and then wrote her and said, would you consider putting together a City Talk? She very kindly said yes, and has assembled this team to give us some input and some insight. So Carly, just first of all, welcome to City Talk. Great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
I know you're in Hamilton, so just tell us a little bit about your particular interest in this, how you got into it, what you do, what your sort of worldview is, and then I'll bring the others on each and we'll get their background, and then we'll have a kind of group chat about where this is all going. So over to you first.
Yeah, it's a great segue because a huge part of how I got here is Lloyd.
There you go.
So if it's a key missing piece of this. So I'll say, hi, I'm Carly Connor. I'd say I'm a building restoration engineer, and I've been a contractor before that. I deal with masonry, I deal with heritage buildings, and really it's my role on the Canadian Association of Heritage Professionals board, as chair of our advocacy committee, whose just sole focus is to look at existing buildings, kind of putting heritage to the side and say, we just look at existing buildings. But we have all of these engineers and professionals that are used to getting the maximum out of a building and then a maximum out of the materials and assets. And we really started to look in the industry of how could we do this more efficiently? How can we look at adaptive reuse? What's working, what's not? And especially as soon as embodied carbon and circularity became words we didn't have before, we suddenly could look at what we did in a different way to say, really, we're doing embodied carbon preservation. Really, we're sustainability professionals. But we have some standards and processes that we have within our sort of heritage existing building industry. And what would that look like if we applied it outside of our little heritage bubble? Like, what could this be, this roadmap for embodied carbon preservation for existing buildings? And how could that relate to the embodied carbon policies of new construction in this overall roadmap? So you could look at a whole development of, what's in front of you and what should stay and be redeveloped, and then maybe what should come down and build the new green thing, but quantifying that impact of those materials, looking at the material preservation as well as the building preservation and that holistic sort of same bubble. So over the years, we were workshopping a whole bunch of different things, from embodied carbon policy to circularity, and saying, how can we optimize these systems? I actually brought Lloyd in to say, like, are we crazy here? Like, give me your honest feedback. Like, this is how we kind of see blowing this all up in a really efficient way. And then he said we weren't crazy. And it was sort of a now what? And a week later, Lloyd happened to be standing next to Ryan Zizzo from Mantle Developments, who was writing an Ontario Embodied Carbon Toolkit and diving into circularity and diving into embodied carbon. And really, by kind of showing up in that conversation with Ryan, it was about adaptive reuse. And then it was about circularity, but understanding that roadmap. And so for a year, we really workshopped, I'd say, global approaches to circularity and embodied carbon in existing buildings, and said, like, what would work here in Toronto? So I'm in Toronto. And we said, like, what would work here? How could it just naturally fit into our processes? And then from the heritage perspective, we said, here's a whole bunch of this stuff that's already there. We already reuse materials and we do all of this internal project reuse. But what we're missing is the system to get it across projects and to get it across the design ecosystem. And it became very clear, like, that was the missing part to make all of this be much more efficient. That as an engineer, we were reusing stuff, but if we didn't need it on the project, all of a sudden it was waste. If we could have used it on the project and we needed to repair more things, we would have used it. But it was this, you started to see the waste creation, both of the sort of existing structure in front of you that you're wasting. But then it also became like the leftovers in new construction, and like the waste from that perspective also became very clear. And as part of this whole conversation, and all of a sudden we had the word circularity to talk to. We didn't have that vernacular even like 5 years ago. And all of a sudden it was, all these other aspects of the construction world started caring about circularity. And we had this roadmap where we were doing it, but there were parts of the system that really didn't work yet. And I'd say, which is sort of why I brought a whole bunch of the people on the call today, to share that historic experience and part of the system that they saw an opportunity to optimize. And only by a lot of the people on this call doing the core work across policy and across sort of innovation and across sort of the client side, does the puzzle really start to look different. But it's really important of sort of seeing the system and understanding where you are in the system and say, like, what's actually the core problem here? Or how could we make something more efficient? But we really saw it's about bringing silos together. That even, I think Marcos we were at a table at the Circularity Summit in Montreal with all of the municipalities, and everyone came down to like the core challenge was silos. Of how to really bring, all of these groups together in order to effectively solve a problem, and then say, now what? Like, it has to be someone's job do something with this when we're all kind of in these different siloed spheres, which is
Hmm.
really what I saw, which made it say, like, I think we can do this, but it needs to be someone's job. So then I made it my job to do all of that and sort of get here today.
That's what you get.
That's what you get.
That's what you get. I mean, this is an entrepreneurial understanding, and I always, when people come up and ask me questions about my career or whatever, and because I'm of a certain age where that gets asked, and I always say, always find a way to say yes. You know, that you can, and it sounds like you did, Carly, like you saw a bigger picture, you saw a bunch of challenge. How could you actually say yes to creating a new kind of opportunity? I'm going to call next, I can ask Xavier to put his camera on and we're going to hear a little bit about him. But what's interesting about the way you just laid that out, all the things, the challenges that you're identifying around uh, um, spotting the gaps, spotting the waste, spotting the ways in which the system, they talk about in the economic world, they talk about plugging the leaks.
Mhm.
How do you actually bring these resources back into the system? And it's an interesting conversation for us to have in every domain, whether it's a green building, whether it's a mental health, whether it's housing approaches, whether it's economic development. These are all same kinds. So I'm interested for the folks in the chat to just for us to start helping each other distill what are the principles that we can learn here that are applicable to all aspects of community building and urban life, not just in terms of, so a circular economy is more than just this piece of it, but that's why it's so interesting to have this conversation. And I will just say off the bat, we're seeing in the chat, there's a comment about the we're always challenged on City Talk to see if we have if we can make sure that we have as many diverse voices as we can have. And there are certain aspects of urban life that are not necessarily engaged with diverse communities as it could be. And I would say that in the environmental sort of green side of it, that is an ongoing challenge, particularly to make sure that we always, when in doubt, up diversity. So I appreciate the critique in the chat about that, and we need to be thinking carefully about how we invite in other constituencies, other communities who are also active in this space. And in many ways, the themes of what you're all discussing are rooted in a kind of Indigenous understanding of a holistic approach to these things. And so I appreciate that we're always adding to our capacity to understand what does seven generations look like, what does stewardship look like, all that kind of thing. You were there, Xavier. Come back. Come back, Xavier. Did we lose him? There he is.
Nice.
Come on back, Xavier. Put your camera on, your mic on, and
All
hi.
right.
And as is often the case, I find with these topics, um, being an Ontario person primarily, when in doubt, look to Quebec. Like, what is going on in Quebec? What can we learn about this? And so, please talk to us about your particular perspective. And Carly just mentioned that you met at a circularity conference, but and that's
Yes.
sort of a buzzword for a lot of us. We're still trying to understand what you mean by that. But talk to us about your particular perspective. Where are you? How did you get into this? What are you thinking about?
Sure. So at Brick Rustic, what we're doing, what we've developed is a technology to allow bricks to be to remove the mortars from bricks during a brick deconstruction project, so that those bricks can be reused either on the same project on the same on site or be used on another project. So we are actually commercializing our machine in the US, across Canada, and in Europe. And in Montreal, we've built a whole ecosystem around our equipment. So we're actually not only renting our machine, we are offering turnkey brick cleanup services. We are as well accepting bricks from site where instead of sending them to landfill, we are undergoing, like, we are cleaning them and we are reselling them on the heritage brick market in Montreal. And we have like a professional services to kind of tie all of that together, where we are working with builders, we're working with architects to their pre-project phase of their project to kind of help them plan their brick reusal project. We do everything from explorationary openings on walls to brick assessment to brick quality assessments to helping them on the specs, plan their project, cost everything around that. So we are offering a full suite of products.
Wow, it's fantastic. What were you doing before, Xavier? How did you
Before
come?
that,
Yeah,
so I worked at the I've been in the construction industry for about 5 years. I've
yeah.
worked at a general contractor for 4.5 of those years, mostly on an institutional project. I
Hmm.
am a industrial engineer by trade, so I started in the manufacturing space and moved into the construction industry. Um, Basically working on project management and applying some technique from the manufacturing world to make construction project more efficient. So from there, moving to a technology like Brick Classic,
Yeah,
it's kind of like the next step. It's
yeah.
kind of it ties in together and making project more efficient, but it has a big environmental component that was really really important to me. Like using our technology, we're able to reduce the carbon footprint of a masonry project by almost up to 80%. It's what really speaks to me was as well we're able to do it at a price that's competitive and even in most cases cheaper than using new bricks, which
Hmm.
means it opens up a whole new possibilities for a project, and it can even be a a way for our clients to reduce their project costs and at the same time reduce their carbon footprint and protect more heritage building because instead of sending brick to landfills, you are reusing them. So that's pretty interesting. That's allowed us as well to even sell our machine to places in the US where the our machine could work on dirty coal or even nuclear energy right on site, and they would still use it because it's cheaper.
Right.
So that's kind of how kind of
It's, it's always a little depressing to me that but it's just the reality that doing the right thing, the only way we can get people to do the right thing is when it becomes cheaper, but this is the dilemma. And as we know, there are lots of traditional cultures that have been recycling, they don't call it that, but reusing and been resourceful about adapting materials for different uses for generations. It's just taken us all a while to catch up. I appreciate that.
yeah.
And
And
you're making a business of it.
yeah, for sure. There's definitely a business opportunity for us. And speaking of that, I think if we don't work on bringing the cost of material reusal down, and kind of with the goal of like making it competitive with traditional, let's say, construction
Yeah,
methods,
yeah,
it's gonna stay a luxury product, right? Where it's only
right.
gonna be done either on institutional projects
Right,
or people that have like that can afford to pay 5-10% more for their masonry project.
right, right. I mean, and that's part of what we have to think about too, is how do we make this more, I always say, more regular? How does it
Yeah,
just become an assumption that we all do it? I first got introduced to the notion of embodied carbon by a guy named Donald Ripkema. Somebody in the chat will know who I'm talking about, an American architect, I think, who said, and he kind of, this is many years ago, and it took me by surprise. It took me a while to understand that the greenest building is the one that's already built, and
of
that the
course.
concept of embodied carbon is still not on everybody's radar, but you're there putting it into very, very practical use. I appreciate that, and you're making a living at it, which is tremendous. Let's go to ISIS now. We're just sort of moving across the country, and don't worry, Natalie, I'll come back to Montreal, but ISIS, maybe you can come on and talk to us from your particular perspective. How do you interact with this whole discourse?
Yeah, so I'm a structural engineer and I'm with WSP
Hmm.
and I'm working on structural steel reuse.
Uh-huh.
And this, we have our case study. I'm working on center block. So that is what we call our central parliament building. And so I've looked at how we need to incorporate the steel from a structural perspective. But now that it has been worked out for this project, we're looking at how do we expand beyond one project? How do we integrate this across many projects, bring this to our clients who are interested in sustainability? And how does this become business as usual instead of this unique case?
It's interesting. ISIS, this is a iconic project. I don't know how many
Yes.
people have seen the scale of this project. I have. It's staggering what the level of investment is, how much time it's taking, and also just the level of detail. But what's important about it is it signals an important strategic use of public sector procurement, right?
Yeah, we definitely had a unique opportunity here. So, for scale, for those who don't know, it's a huge building.
Huge.
On the reuse only, we're looking at 1,700 beams. So, for this to be our first local dive into steel reuse, having such a big quantity, we really had to work out every single detail. So, we have some precedent. This isn't the first time WSP is doing this. The UK has a head start specifically with steel. So they worked out a lot of the kinks and were able to apply it here. And this project is special and unique because it's one client, one building. But because the scale of the retrofit for the basement works stretches the schedule so that we can take the beams out of this one building, take them away, inspect them, get them prepared to come back into the building, and have that go full circle. So go ahead.
No, listen, you keep going. What were you about to say?
I was gonna say this is different than other projects where you maybe don't have a source building or your timeline is so short. You're doing a small renovation. You won't have the time necessarily to do all that work and bring it back.
Right.
So
Right.
how do we manage that material flow?
Yeah. I mean, what's so interesting is we're trying to mainstream these practices. What does it take to mainstream these practices? As we know, there have been pockets of experimentation. Traditional, as I suggested, Indigenous communities have had these principles forever. And then maybe some small examples where someone starts to say, well, I can do this, I can model, I can operate this way. But when it starts to come into the public procurement and how center block is being rebuilt, you have to just say to yourself, okay, maybe we're making some serious progress here. So I just want everyone to know that I think this is a hopeful conversation. I know it's easy to get impatient. Why did it take us so long? But we are seeing some advancement. We're making some progress. Yeah.
But this isn't our first time in Ontario.
Okay.
So there's a project in Toronto, the University of Toronto Scarborough campus.
Okay.
They bought some steel members from the ROM, the museum.
Okay.
So when that demo happened, part of a big retrofit, they just bought that off them, trucked it over to the other building and installed it. So it's forming that connection. That's the most challenging part.
How do
But
you
it has been done.
how do you get the transfer? How do you know where I mean, we've had waste material exchange for a while, but then there's a whole bunch of other factors here: economics, efficiency. Do you have the connections? Can you get the stuff? Do you have the transportation infrastructure to be able to do it, harvest it, right? Logistics, good old logistics.
It's creating those connections and creating them early enough that we can make it all happen, get all the planning in place. So it's totally doable, but it's different than our normal procurement of steel.
Right.
So establishing those connections early on, getting everyone talking on the same page, and then making sure that we are gearing our design to the available steel.
Yeah, great.
And I think part of that, when you're transferring material from one person to another, you need to have a guarantee that it's in good condition. So having some standardization in the industry.
Oh, the good old S word, standardization. Because I think that's the fear. I mean, we can see this in the food system, right? Where we've had food that would be for years, there are probably food activists on the call, where we've had food that is technically no longer saleable, and traditionally was just going to be tossed in the garbage. Then we started to see different kinds of food brokers who got into the act and said, well, wait a second, I can actually package that differently, or I can get it into social service organizations that are doing food distribution. But again, it was the same principle. How do we actually look carefully at what we're discarding, and how do we use it in a thread it back into the system, into a circular system? Isis, I'm delighted to have a structural engineer on CityTalk. You keep us in a built environment that stays up.
It's great to be here.
Thank you for your service. Okay, let's now go to Marcos, because he's the other piece of the puzzle here about what the role of the regulator is, or of a city government. And how do you see that? I mean, I'm kind of staggered by your job title alone, Marcos. So just describe to people what it is you've been doing in Richmond and how you guys have been approaching this, and then we will get to Natalie. Go ahead, Marcos.
Well, thank you to invite me to be here. We in the city have the first strategy for circular economy that is connected with our climate action, and we are working right now under the strategy to integrate and reduce embodied carbon. And one of the strategies is to understand how we can use our demolition policy by law to increase the flow of material in the secondary material market. We started a few years ago to work with different stakeholders, and our understanding is that the system is not broken. The system is absolutely disconnected and working in silos. Carly made the comment earlier about that. We start to put different actors in the industry and start to map the flow of the materials in Richmond economy and understand why the materials are selected in that way, why they're choosing that way, what the expectation of the lifespan, and start to make more understanding around the material. We remove from our communication the word waste,
Right.
because if the material is waste, just send to the landfill, no option. But if no waste, we need to rename to create a good perception in the community, because no one is willing to build the house or the infrastructure with waste. And our focus is understand how we can recover or preserve the value of the materials and the resources that we have already in the economy. Working with all the actors, we start to also integrate concepts like the urban mining and the urban harvesting. We start to go to nature, and no one is taking material from the nature without transformation. And we are planning to do exactly in that way in the urban environment. You say, why? I need to invest technology, knowledge, and science on what we are doing, and start from the less intervention as possible to the reuse in the direct way, or how much I can transform this to be useful again and recover the value in the market. But we are also integrating this with how we can reduce embodied carbon, preserve the embodied history of the materials, and create the value of the community for continuation. Because today the idea is to break down, build something new, and it's creating this connection with the previous history of the space. And people is losing the feeling of I belong here. When we can preserve the materials and connect with the story and go back through the flow in different aspects, and we start to connect different groups and putting down silos, that is working in different way. By now, in the pilot projects that we are doing, that was a successful approach, and we are growing step by step in this direction.
You know, there's this whole area of inquiry called material culture, which I'm not that familiar with what it really means, but I'll say what I think it means to me, which is that there's a tactile, visceral quality. I mean, I guess this would be at the heart of the work of the Urban Institute and I'm assuming a lot of us who are on the chat, is that we believe that our physical environment affects our capacity to function and earn a living, and it affects our experience of the world and our attachment to place. And so this idea that we would be really thoughtful, as you're suggesting, about and intentional to actually have a job title that says you're the manager of the circular economy, that's fundamentally a commitment that Richmond has made. And so it's threading through all of your municipal conduct, right?
Yes, and easy understanding also the circular economy is not about just the material, but also how we can create economic opportunities and also create social values
Yeah.
and resiliency. More than ever, we need to understand how we can preserve the material locally, and that's a strategical thing to be less dependent from outside. And you can
I
see
mean,
all the
this is the discussion that the tariff uh, thing put us suddenly into, is that we have to think about, wait a minute, how do we look at our own autonomy, our own self-sustainability? It's all part of
exactly
that narrative, eh?
and the knowledge behind that as well. People that is from different sectors sit together and
Yeah.
plan together and understand together.
They've got to know. I mean, that's the notion of mapping. I think this is part of what we always, our colleagues at Shorefast are always saying, can we map? Do you know your economy? Can you map your economy? And you're saying, let's map your materials. Let's figure out where they're coming from and going to. And there's an interesting question for the chat that Matt's offered. Matt, I'm going to deal with it when I get everybody on about it. Are there ways that we could create better documentation? Marcos, just look at the chat. You'll see a question from Matt, and we'll come back and deal with it around when a building is being demolished. Could there actually be an inventory of what are the materials that are like an auction, I suppose, or whatever, that we can, if you think of it, we can see this in clothing. Thrift was not always, well, thrift has always been a thing, but thrift is now a huge thing. And lots of folks, I'm sure, on this call will tell us that they don't buy anything new, clothing wise. They only thrift because they're trying to, well, first of all, because they like what they can buy, but also that it is keeping it out of the landfill. And it's also making it a more stronger circular economy. Okay, Marcos, I'm going to come back to you. I'm going to ask Natalie to join us, our last person to get on. And Natalie, it's great to see you. And I'm sure it's been hot in Montreal too. Probably just, have you had a break from the heat now? It's a little cooler there. You got a jacket on.
Climate change. It's all good.
Yeah, yes, exactly. It can be, it cannot be. But talk to us about your particular introduction into this thing. And thanks for everybody. Continue to put stuff in the chat. So many great resources, great questions, book suggestions, whatever you've got, throw it into the chat. Okay, Natalie, come at us. Tell us what you're about.
Okay. That's okay. No pressure. So I have a weird history, and by having a weird history, it allows me to do stuff that I don't have to follow everybody else's trajectory as far as
Yeah.
traditional real estate developers.
Yeah.
So because I had no rules, I was able to just do stuff that I felt was aligned to my values. And I took some notes when the other speakers were speaking so I could try to be concise about things that we could link together. So as an example, some building materials as far as history, I know that the fun fact is that we renovated a church.
You did.
So that we could do something different on it. But when we started to realize about the materials of the stonework that were outside, well, that made the facade of our buildings, it was actually workers that came to Montreal like in the late 1890s.
Yeah.
They excavated the Lachine Canal, and it was through McGill University that we actually found out that they took the excavated stones from the Lachine Canal and built the church with it,
How
literally.
fabulous. And you
So
found that out how?
we had to write like a historical document of what we needed to keep or not keep. Now, we were not actually planning to change the facade. We
Right.
only started realizing that when we had to like put a door in, that it was 4.5 feet wide. This situation of the door that was going through this brick or stonework, excuse me.
Mm.
And I don't know where we lost our way because people do that and did that. You took something that was
Right.
waste in one area and they put it into something else. It like I don't know where we thought it was cool to
When
like
did we
launch
lose
the
that?
building.
Yeah,
When did we lose it?
when
Like
did we lose
we were
that?
like, oh,
Just
this is
common
all
sense.
new circular economy. I'm like, dudes, this has been.
That's right.
I mean,
We're going back.
I don't
Yeah.
understand. And at the same time, okay, then I went into large industrial buildings and renovated those. And as we started bringing in new tenants, because it used to be like 60,000 square feet of like one floor, and then we started subdividing it up into smaller businesses. And then, the next company would come in and be like, oh, here's my architect, and they want us to rip the entire section down and rebuild. And I was like, why? You're still building a conference room, a bathroom, whatever. It makes no sense. So we
Right.
started actually taking the interior wood structures of our walls, the building insulation materials, because we were throwing it out. Well, I wasn't, someone else was. And then 2 seconds later, a new truck would come with the same materials to build the new wall. And I was like, still haven't figured out what to do with gyprock yet, in case anybody else has figured that out. But we just kind of, first of all, we don't want to let people demolish for no reason. Inside, I'm talking about our buildings. And we have a very strict policy on how we could reuse the interiors of our buildings before we build new. And then when we do that, the contractors are required to recuperate the material. And if we flip that now to new construction, now we're building carbon neutral, affordable housing
Right.
because people told us we couldn't. And I have a problem with things where you were saying like, turn those yeses into
Mhm.
something that is much more on a daily basis. So actually we're working with Xavier on a project in a city called Saint-Hyacinthe here in Quebec. And it's the first time ever that I have to demolish some buildings to build new housing, just because the housing is just, it's not in a good shape, whatever. So we're actually working on doing exactly that. We're creating an inventory of everything that we're ripping down.
Mhm.
We're using stuff to move forward into the new building, but we're also putting a lot of pressure on our architects and our engineers, specifically our structural engineers, in the new buildings to incorporate materials that have already been used somewhere else. And I think that's really cool. In one way of understanding is there's a nonprofit organization in Montreal called Synergie, and they taught us something a long time ago, is that someone else's waste is someone else's opportunity.
Yep.
But everyone's talking about the good news. I just want to bring up for 3 seconds about why people don't do this as far as the real estate developer. The major issue is logistics, right? How do I get it from one site to another? How do I make sure that I store it? Because land costs me money, so I can't just rip things apart. So in Saint-Hyacinthe, as an example, the city's working with us to give us like a lot that's near there so we could store things so that as we move in our different large machinery to be able to excavate and stuff like that, that I don't have to like pay twice to move the materials. Another issue is availability. Like if I build a much bigger building, then I only have a certain amount of bricks, as an example, to reuse in a section. And architects, especially builders, are not really happy about how to install these. Are they going to be there on time? I don't have, time is money. So what's
Yeah.
going to happen if the material isn't there on time and you're slowing me down and then I can't deliver? The insurance companies who are like, wait a second, you just used a reused material. I need to have that documented. And I saw someone on the chat earlier, right? Can we put that as part of the demolition permit? What we can do everything, but if we don't do it quickly and efficiently, it's going to cost more, and then more people aren't going to do that. And I remember a long time ago finding a company who was recycling or reusing, repurposing, because that's the better word, these TV, those old TVs like old people used to use that had these big screens or
Old
whatever.
people, just
Old
say
people,
it.
I know, we
Yeah,
keep saying
okay.
that.
Yep.
So they took these screens and made like a tile from it. And I was like, oh, that's super cool. And it was a B Corp. And I was like, all right, this is really awesome. And it was $55 a square foot. So I don't want this to be a luxury situation. I want it to be a business as usual. So I don't want to take up too much more time, but just to tell you, when you think circularly, a whole bunch of problems happen, but a whole bunch of solutions happen. And
Yeah.
it has to start with you saying, I'm going to do this. There is no other way, but we can't make it more expensive because then we screw up with the affordability situation. So we just really want to be able to create that recipe and create more people like the people that are on this talk about how do we figure out what worked in one sector that could work in something else. So we're certainly not perfect, but we're trying to live imperfectly better each day.
Yeah. I mean, the great thing about this is that we've got people from the private sector, we've got people from the civil society, and we've got folks from municipal government. So it's not everybody, as I suggested, but it's a whole good mix. So let's all put our cameras on. We always call this the bun fight. This is when we get to have a really interesting kind of open conversation. And I'm going to suggest you open your mic so that I don't have to remind you every time when you're still muted. So just open your mic, unless you got a barking dog, which nobody ever has. Um, so many interesting things that are being surfaced in the chat here as well. Thanks, gang. And thank you for chatters. Thank you for all the comments you put in here and the books and the Mark. Great to see Mark Roseland. Mark, nice to see you on this call. And please put more resources here and lots of questions. And you can see when I ask that, lots of people will, because we're building our kind of collective knowledge. I want to ask also, somebody's just said that June 23 was Upcycling Day. Who knew? So I didn't know that. A couple of days ago, we had a day called Upcycling Day. But so again, if we could just share these resources with one another, apparently there's some good maps that ECCC put up. So let's see those. The other thing is I saw a reference to 401 Richmond. I am pretty sure it was Margie Zodner that introduced me to you, Natalie, at the very beginning. Margie is the architect and owner
He's
of
awesome,
I'm
by the
pretty
way.
sure. And Margie is a huge pioneer, huge figure in this world, an architect and a property owner who took the principles of circularity and adaptive reuse and all those things. And if you've never been to Toronto to go to 401 Richmond, go to 401 Richmond and you will see embodied carbon in action. How about that? So I was going to say that I want to chat a little bit about it. There seems to me there are issues around rules. There's issues around money. And then there's probably issues around engaging design or professionals and designers. So let me start with rules and ask all of you, if there were a bylaw or a particular kind of constraint or law that is in place now that you think should come off the books, could be provincial, could be municipal, could be federal, that would be, or maybe we need a new rule. Do we need to pull some old rules off? Do we need a new rule? Do you see in your purview a game-changing rule? Who could take that? Is there one thing? Could be simple. Is there one thing, Carly? Is there one thing?
Landfill capacity, cost
Okay.
of landfill. Someone's paying for it. It's subsidized. It's real cheap.
You want
And I
to
think
make it more expensive to throw stuff away.
only if it needs to go there. Like if it needs to go to the landfill, it's inexpensive. It's there. But if it really didn't need to go there, it shouldn't be there. Like someone's subsidizing it. Mostly like here's brand new stuff that's
Yeah.
going. It's just like how to look at this low hanging fruit that it's just really easy to toss it out. But can we kind of build that system back? And I'd say on the flip side, we put in the chat kind of our approach to the Ontario Embodied Carbon Toolkit was that the rules that could exist to just add to what we have to help just make more informed decisions, or grab this information and put it in people's faces just to understand the waste. But it all comes down to logistics. If the material doesn't have anywhere else to go, then it needs to go to landfill. So none of those things matter until that logistic system is in place.
But you're saying should be last resort, and should be, could it be made prohibitively expensive so that would force it to be repurposed? Just an anecdote, which, call me, I'm complicit in this. If you during COVID became a consumer of with your family or a lot of takeout food, the municipal solid waste stream since COVID has done this because of takeout containers. It's just shocking. And so the question is going to be, how do we make that prohibitively expensive so that you take your own container to that store, or whatever. Rules. Any other rules? If you had a magic wand, what rule would you get rid of? What rule would you create? Go ahead, Marcos.
Well, I think with what Carly was saying, the taxation system today is not helping, because you are paying, again, the taxes on the material that you are recovering, and it's not incentivizing the market to adopt these new materials in new processes. And it's a double taxation.
So what would you do? You'd do something at HST, you'd do something the provincial sales tax, you'd look at, are there
taxes are in the federal government regulation, but we should be working with them as well to understand how this whole flow can be, I'm not saying no taxes, but a different system of taxes that can stimulate the market to naturally start to see in these materials a new way to create profit or new revenue and keep the economy working the healthy way. Today is very unclear, and is very dependable on charities to companies recover the money, and that's not something that is stimulating the sectors or different industries to absorb these new materials.
Kind of crazy.
Go a different way, and I feel like we're always talking about taxes and penalties and all stuff, and it's 30% more for people to build today than it was a couple of years ago. So we have like a major issue with the housing crisis, and I always say we have a major problem with affordable housing, because there is housing, it's just not enough affordable housing. And a lot of the housing is not actually built properly because it is still built with like easiest, cheapest, and quickest. But it should go a different way. And you did mention, Marco, something about incentivization. So if I'm doing this really cool stuff about potentially reusing whatever, I should get my building permit faster. I should pay less taxes on my permits. And I should be incentivized to potentially build an additional floor, as an example, so that I can actually change the market. I always say that real estate is, or I'm going to say investment in real estate is liquid. So if one city becomes too prohibitory to build, the developers will go somewhere else. And that situation doesn't change on a systemic problem. So unless we make a rule for absolutely everybody across Canada, which may or may not take several years to implement, and maybe that rule is crappy, and maybe that rule should be changed quicker, and it doesn't, because our rulemaking doesn't go as fast as we should. So we should be actually highlighting other people and being like, okay, it costs me X amount of money more because I'm documenting all this stuff. So how do I recoup this? Well, I could recoup it by having a tax break or not paying a same permit fee or something. So I feel like before we put that stick in the way, we need to go a different way and incentivize people to be the early adopters. Maybe that's just because it benefits me, but
no, that's okay. I mean, you're
transparent.
We're trying to make this to benefit everyone's self-interest. So that's part of what I'm asking about rules. How do we create those incentives and carrots? And maybe it's a blend. Isis, any thoughts from you about particular rules or regulation or impediments? Go for it.
I'm no policymaker, but if there was a rule I could put in, it would be mandating a pre-demolition audit. So Natalie had mentioned doing an inventory before doing demo or any work. Once we know what is available and what quantities, that'll allow us to really gear industry towards the waste stream. So if there's an incentive that forced people to do the audit, we would understand the industry a lot better.
Yeah, and one of the incentives would be if there was a financial incentive. I think what Natalie is saying is if you could make it more profitable to do the right thing, That's one question.
How
You make
about
it,
not profitable, just less costly?
yeah, okay, okay. Whatever. Give me the
Okay.
language, Nat. Whatever it is, less cost, a way to save money. I mean, because that is the other piece that you raised, Natalie, at the beginning is, and I think it's coming up in the chat too. We are at a time where affordability is a crisis, where that is being promoted at the public policy level. They want things that increase affordability. How do we fit this whole domain into making life more affordable?
I,
Xavier, any thought?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Isis, and then I'll go to Xavier. Go ahead,
I
Isis.
was going to touch on the cost because when
Okay.
you're reclaiming something, if you're getting it at current scrap prices, that's a
Mhm,
very low price for structural elements for steel.
mhm.
So there is this buffer between what you're buying scrap elements at versus what new steel and other materials cost. So you have this buffer, and if you can figure out cost analysis for reusing this material and you can fit within that, you might be able to come out cost parity if you're lucky, maybe a little better than that. But obviously, every project
Assuming
is
that you have
unique.
an engineer that is willing to sign off on material that they don't know anything about. Um,
Yeah.
just yeah.
So we need documentation. We need thorough
We need
documentation.
documentation so that
Yep.
so that public safety is maintained, so that structural engineer doesn't feel their stamp is in jeopardy when
Yep.
they actually sign off on something. What were you going to say, Xavier?
Yes. So, well, and it's something to kind of add to Isaac's point. So you mentioned that people are trying to see what's happening in Quebec to kind of get ideas for the rest of Canada. In Quebec, we have the tendency to turn to Europe,
Mm-hmm.
and what we're seeing in France and the rest of Europe, what really push um, builders and clients to go toward the brick reusal road, because right now Europe is probably going to be our best market for our machine in the next probably 6 months. It's going to overtake all the rest of our revenue in the rest of the world. Is basically those pre demolition material audits that are more and more being mandated depending on the size of the project in certain countries, and really cost of material disposal. These two things right now, even before our machine, created a big brick, let's say brick cleanup industry and a
Yeah.
brick reusal industry.
Yeah.
And when we're coming into Europe with our machine, it's about giving them a more efficient way to clean and reuse their bricks rather than convincing them to clean and reuse their bricks. So all that what those regulations made is really create a favorable environment for material reusal there.
Right.
But on the other side, and it's on the cost side with that Natalie mentioned, um, the actual like let's say regular linear construction methods have had like 100 years to for supply chain to industrialize, get hyper efficient. You should look at like brick in the brick business, but like brick factories in the US, they're mostly now operated by robots. You can they make brick without even there's almost no
You know,
human touch,
I
and
was wondering about that. Where's AI in this? Yeah, yeah.
it's super efficient. And I'm an industrial engineer, so I know what it can look like. But it's been 100 years in the making. So at the beginning, like there has to be incentives to encourage builders, developers, and institutional clients to kind of get started and do those first projects, so that they have a reason to do them, and there's an ecosystem that can build around for material reusal that can build around those projects, right? So and give a chance to those to business like ours, but there's tons of them in Montreal,
Mm-hmm.
um, and across Canada, to kind of give them a chance to kind of get their roots, build the logistical chains and all of that. Because if I could get let's say right now in our brick recycle in our brick let's say the brick we take from project, we clean and we resell. Right now we do, let's say 200,000 bricks a year.
Mm-hmm.
If I would get 2 million bricks a year from job sites or from sites around the Montreal area, well, I could clean them much more efficiently. I could start to
Right.
automate, and I'll do all of my process and bring my cost per brick a lot down by a factor of probably 10 to 20.
So let me, Zab, Marcos, do you have a rule? I mean, you're in the business of working in municipal government. Is there a particular rule that you would put on the books, take off the books?
Well, not a rule, but maybe the strategy. Today we are working, we need a more comprehensive approach for circular economy
Yeah.
and try to understand how the materials are going to work around that. In my experience, what we are doing here in Richmond, we need more system thinking approach in how we are connecting, because we have a lot of rules right now in the market. If you start to dig, the circular economy is not a new concept. Even that it's not saying circular economy, you can see legislation 30 years old and still is working on this concept and this idea, but it's disconnected. You can see that people are thinking about the environmental aspect or the environmental impact or the financial or the affordability or the social aspect, how we are using, different communities. When you start to put all together in the system thinking approach, the OECD is recommending that as a new generation of policy to stop now, map what is already there, understand the interconnection between this, and what is the impact in what we are trying to do, and later just fill the gaps. No, we don't need to reinvent the wheel in that point. And that was exactly what we did with our strategy. You can see that it's covering transversally, is cross-casting the different aspects that we have in
Well,
Richmond.
and you're illustrating that what a local government can do. I mean, I think this is part of what Natalie's comment was. Let's figure out where are you? Where do you fit in the system, and what can you do? And in your case, in municipal government, you have been able to create a framework, and you have been able to incentivize this, right?
But we need also the framework coming from the province and from the federal level,
Right,
because
and
the
it's
cities
somehow,
are very
yeah.
limited in what we can do. And we are working in a system. Industry needs to adapt about what we are asking and provide that just for Richmond. The affordability thing is going to increase costs because they need to adapt everything just for us. But the whole market is asking that. They can create scale, and it's easier to supply that and faster, and it's more logical way to approach.
Yeah, there are, Astor just put up, thanks Astor. There's a nice comment in the drawing a parallel from the film industry where there have been some requirements that have have required a sustainability plan that Telefilm Canada is doing. Thanks for this. We've only got a few minutes left. Carly, I'm going to come back to you. It's obviously, this isn't a new conversation. I appreciate that. Lots of you have been toiling in the vineyard for a while on these topics, but we are at an interesting moment where the economy is relocalizing in some ways, where we have where we obviously are experiencing the impacts of climate, and lots of factors that could in fact support this kind of stewarding, more thoughtful stewarding of resources. Again, in the next 2 or 3 years, what are you going to be doubling down on and focusing? I'm going to ask everybody that. We've only got 4 minutes, so talk yourself accordingly. Quick. Go, Carly.
I'll say for the last few years, everything that everyone just said on this call were the problems and solutions, but how to connect it.
Okay.
And so I'd say with Natalie's point of logistics, so we're building a marketplace with the logistics. And then you needed the trust in the materials. We're attaching that engineering level of trust that the original design team had in those materials, and attaching it to just not have random materials in a yard, but have them be trusted and create that real network. And then we're creating a reuse collective to bring the whole design community and owners together to share the information, to share the costing, to input all of the available materials and say, does anyone want these? This is what it'll cost me.
Yeah, you're creating a kind of
because people want stuff. Really, a conversation started an exact year ago with Natalie being like, if you can provide these materials, I want them, but there's no system to provide them.
So we're back to this connective tissue logistics. Got it.
And take it from a project to across projects of and how that just
a portfolio
standardized.
Yeah. Right. Isis, thought from you. We're going to run out of time, so just briefly.
Yeah, everything Carly said, plus stay tuned for standardization. We're working on that, and I'm hoping to have new news soon on structural steel.
You heard it here first. Structural steel standardization coming soon to a community near you. Xavier.
So on our end, well, I think that our end goal is to get to a point where when it makes sense for institutional and regular project, we have brick reuse is kind of is the primary option. So for us, what's really going to be important across Canada in the next 1 or 2, 3 years is to get those bigger project kind of done with partners that want to make a difference. We have a couple pilot projects that are going to be one in Quebec, one in Saguenay, one in Sherbrooke, one in Montreal, getting those projects done to prove that like brick reusal on site can be can make sense, that there's economy that can be done on the project, get those done so that we can get on more and more, we can be spec more and more on project. That's gonna, yeah.
Perfect. Marcos.
More spaces to get this kind of conversations and include more
Yep.
actors. Is I guess is key to create a pre-competitive space where we can collaborate to co-create together and approach common problems. Is crucial.
Totally. Last word to you, Natalie.
I love those last words.
It's yours.
Be prepared to live in chaos and figure it out.
On that true and hopeful note, thank you for joining us for City Talk, gang. Really, Carly, thank you for pulling this group together. We've been delighted. And as usual, the chat never disappoints. Many great resources and exchanges and what about and questions and could we and da. WhatsApp groups. That's all blown up over there in the chat. Thank you for joining. It's great to meet you, Xavier, Carly. You and I'll stay in contact. Obviously, Marcos, Isis, and Natalie. Great to see you again. We'll put some good stuff in the chat so people can see, or we'll post it probably on social, some of your projects and some of the work. And I do hope that we'll continue this conversation and continue to animate people. This is what CUI is in the business of doing, of creating connective tissue. So City Talk is part of that. I just want to say, as I suggested, we're at the end of our City Talk season, end of June. I want to thank Wendy Rowland, Emily Wassendorf, and Emily Charlebois, who have been the principal producers of City Talk, many City Talk staff, CUI staff that participate, and then all of us that have been regulars on City Talk. Thanks, gang. People come in from all over the world. You're on holidays, you still come into City Talk. As I say, you download later. This is an important part of how we're building the fabric of Canadian communities. And we're benefiting from people around the world, and we have listeners and participants from around the world too. So really great to be part of this. We'll take a break now. We're gonna move a little bit more to some more podcasts because we're gonna have more in-depth conversations. We always say that these City Talks are really like a buffet. They're like a little sampler. And then afterwards, invariably, people say, look, I really would have liked to heard more from Marcus or more from Xavier or more from Isis or more from Carly or more from Natalie. So we're going to move to a more podcast where we can have longer conversations, which is good. But we will always have this place. And I just want to put a shout out to those of you that have been tuning into City Talk since March 2020. We have continued together to navigate uncertain times of extraordinary challenge, but where we all had shared a fundamental commitment to the benefit of our community and to boosting its economic, social, and environmental quality. And we're all engaged in that. So thanks, city builders across the country. Thanks for being part of City Talk. Have a great rest of the week, and I hope you have a great summer vacation, and we'll see you back. We'll see you back here soon on a screen near you. Thanks again. Great to see everybody.